So I want to talk a few minutes about Shedeur Sanders. That's right, Shedeur Sanders, who is the son of NFL Hall of Famer Deion Sanders. Shedeur was drafted by the Cleveland Browns, but not in the first round, not in the second round, and not even in the third. He fell all the way to the fifth round. And that fall has raised more than a few eyebrows, because if anyone was paying attention to his college career, that drop in the draft does not make sense based on talent and performance alone. And let's be clear about it. This was a quarterback who produced at multiple schools, both at Jackson State in Mississippi and at Colorado. He threw for over 3,200 yards in Jackson State in 2022, 27 touchdowns. Then went on to notch more than 3,200 yards again with 27 touchdowns at Colorado the following year in 2023 with just 3 interceptions. Despite at Colorado playing behind one of the worst offensive lines in that conference. He was poised, he's intelligent, he's accurate on the field, and confident. Now, many analysts prior to the draft had him going late in the first round, and nearly all of them had him going no later than the third. Almost no one had him slipping this far. So let's think about why that happened. Now, if you've listened to me on this podcast, you already know one of the answers that I'm leaning toward. In fact, I did an entire podcast segment on the idea that everything in America is about race. Race is intertwined and embedded into the DNA of every part of American life and society, not only historically, but even in 2025. I believe that to be true. And in that podcast segment, you can go and look it up. I gave both historical and modern examples. And no, I don't believe that's victim talk. That's not making excuses. It's just an observation rooted, number one, and what my eyes can see, what my ears can hear, and rooted in how systems function in this country. So Shedeur Sanders himself, being black, did not just get evaluated as a football player. He got evaluated through a lens, one shaped by race, one shaped by bias, by what kind of black man he appears to be. Because as any black person in America knows, we are not all seen the same by systems of power. Some are seen as acceptable, some are palatable and safe, and others are viewed as arrogant, out of place, threatening, and too aware of their own worth. It's amazing how few people understand this, and we see it in this Shedeur Sanders situation. One of the replies is, well, it can't be about race because there were black quarterbacks. There were black players that were chosen before him. There were black quarterbacks that were drafted before him. So how could it be about race? When you make a statement like that, that lets me know you really don't understand how race has functioned and works in America. All black people are not viewed and perceived the same way by anti-black racism. That's not just true in 2025. That has been true throughout the entire history of racism in America. Do you not know that back in the slave days, a few black people were allowed inside of the master's house, but most of them were left out in the field to work? And usually, the smarter of the enslaved individuals were not the ones who were given access inside. No, the smarter ones were usually kept out in the fields. And tragically, many of them were even snuffed out, brutalized and murdered because it was perceived that they might be too smart or too intelligent and would eventually push back against their white enslavers. So when someone claims that the delay in drafting Shedeur Sanders had nothing to do with race because other black players and even black quarterbacks were drafted before him, but they failed to dig deeper into the perception of those other black quarterbacks compared to the perception of Sanders, and how those differing perceptions might explain why Sanders fell in the draft It just shows that they don't have a clear grasp on how racism operates in America. Racism is not just about the color of one's skin. It's also about the narratives, the stereotypes, the assumptions tied to individuals, even within the same racial group. Now, of course, the average black person understands this because we are often forced to think about racism and how it impacts us daily. It's funny and ironic, though, and maybe not so funny, that a lot of racist, anonymous accounts who get on Twitter and other social media sites and make it their profession to talk about racism don't even grasp this basic concept about how racism actually works. So in that vein, here is my observation of how anti-black racism views Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders is the type of black person that a lot of white racists love to hate. He is capable, competent. His college career proves that. Now, whether or not he should have been drafted before Cam Ward, who was first in the draft, very few people had him falling out of the first round, and no one was projecting him to fall this far down in the draft. His athletic ability speaks for itself, and the fact that he fell so far only weakens the idea that any of this was about his ability. Had he been drafted late in the first round, early in the second, maybe even late in the second, that point could have been debatable, but he fell so far that it has become quite obvious something else was at play. Now, Sanders is not just the type of black person that white racists love to hate because he is competent. He actually knows he is competent. And in fact, he might know he is competent more than he is actually competent. That level of arrogance and haughtiness is something that if I owned a football team and were drafting, I would want from someone who is supposed to lead my team to an NFL championship, one of the hardest things to accomplish in sports. I would actually want someone who probably thinks that they are better than they are. And if you can combine that with a top-notch work ethic, and the ability to learn, that kind of confidence becomes a valuable trait on the football field. Now, we know that white culture loves that type of arrogance because they just elected someone like that to the presidency. Donald Trump explains a lot about white racism and anti-black culture, especially in how they view leaders and what they look for in leadership qualities and abilities. Shedeur Sanders is not nearly as arrogant about his football abilities as Donald Trump is about his leadership abilities, his intellect, or the policies that he is promoting. Yet, many white people love Donald Trump. White evangelicals, over 80% of them voted for him 3 times for president. They love his arrogance. They love how brute, how curt, how rude he can be. For many people, this is one of the main reasons they voted for him. So when they tell us that Shedeur Sanders should be more humble and maybe he would have been drafted higher, or anytime they comment on any perceived lack of humility in black people, they are unintentionally telling on themselves, because the very traits they criticize in black athletes are the ones they openly celebrate in others. The arrogance and the bravado they supposedly find off-putting in people like Shedeur Sanders are the same type of traits they loved enough to elect into the highest office in the land. Shedeur Sanders' problem is not arrogance. It is not a lack of humility. Those things only seem to bother them when they appear in black faces. But Sanders exemplifies the type of black person they love to hate because he does not need them. Unlike many black athletes waiting by the phone for a team to call their name, Shedeur Sanders is already a millionaire, the son of a millionaire, and he has already earned his millions in college through NIL deals. His parents were millionaires. Even if he were never drafted, he would be fine. He does not need the NFL. He does not need the NFL's money. He does not need the approval of billionaire NFL team owners. It is not just that he is in that position. It is that he carries himself as someone who knows it. Most people do not like seeing that type of self-possession in someone that they are about to hire or bring into their organization. And if that person is black, the resentment is even stronger. That brings us to another point about how Shedeur's father, Deion Sanders, factors into this whole ordeal. Because for me, it definitely plays a part, because we know that the type of demeanor Shedeur carries has to, in some way, have come from his father. First, it's important to note that they could not break Deion Sanders when he was a player, and even after his career has ended. Having accomplished what he did in the league, dare I say, the league and Major League Baseball, because he played both sports at a professional level and carried himself the way that he did. People could say that they disliked him, but they could not diminish him or question his abilities, because his career has already been written in stone. But what they can do is, from the outset of Shedeur's career, his son, try to diminish him any way they can. They cannot undo Deion, but they can try to chip away at the next generation. So Shedeur's confidence, his self-possession, his ability to believe in himself is a reflection of his upbringing and who his father was, and they know that. Now, while I would agree that this is in part about Deion Sanders, his father, it's actually about something much larger. I believe it is about how anti-black white culture, especially where it controls important institutions, will seek to, quote, put in their place any black person who carries themselves with a level of confidence and arrogance that they do not think is fitting for someone that they see as beneath them. It's not about humility as a virtue. It's about humility as a demand, something that they do not require from themselves or from their own leaders, but something that they expect from black people who they perceive as inferior. And anytime black people reject that posture of inferiority, there will be efforts to tear them down. That is why I am not surprised that there could be teams that assessed Shedeur's talents as higher than others that they chose but still passed on him. It's not about building the best team. It's about preserving the social order they believe in. Racism has always been willing to take a loss if it means preserving racial dominance. So for billionaire owners, winning on the field is not the ultimate prize. They are billionaires. They have already won financially. So if choosing a lesser quarterback means preserving their comfort, their hierarchy, and their perception of who should know their place, then so be it. Winning games can be secondary to winning culturally. A challenge with modern racism and situations like this, it doesn't always come draped in white hoods or burning crosses like yesteryear. Today, it's buttoned up, it's polished, respectable, it's corporate, it's algorithmic, and it hides behind scouting reports, leadership intangibles, and so-called locker room concerns. It's the kind of racism that knows how to nod politely in public while doing damage in private. And I do believe, unfortunately, that we are headed back to a time when more of the hatred is worn openly again. But even if not, it's as if the danger has never left. Make America great again. Now, I'm not claiming to know what's in the heart or what's whispered behind every closed door. I do not stand 25 feet above contradiction. I can only observe patterns, look at the facts, and make an informed judgment. And the facts say Shedeur Sanders, based on his body of work, had no business slipping to the 5th round. That's not just my opinion. It's what nearly every draft analyst, every college stat sheet, and every highlight reel suggests. So if it wasn't about his ability, then it was about something else. And given America's history, it is not hard to guess what that something else might be. Now, will Shedeur succeed in the NFL? Time will tell. But if he does, then this becomes just one more example of a lesson Black families have been teaching their children for generations. You have to be better to be seen as equal. Average won't cut it. Excellence is the entry fee. You've got to break records just to get a seat at the table. And the irony is that while some are screaming today that Black people haven't earned anything because of DEI tipping the scales in their favor, history continues to remind us that the scales were never balanced to begin with. And Shedeur's draft slide may just be another example of the same old imbalance. It's just dressed up, dusted off, and delivered with a smile.